Hi there, today I'm going to be working on page 90 and I'm going to be talking about some of my favorite artists. I just wrote down a list of 5 of them because I could probably talk about them forever, so I had to narrow it down to just a few. The first one I'm going to talk about is Naoko Takeuchi. She is, of course, the creator of Sailor Moon. Sailor Moon has been a huge part of my life since I was a very little kid. I started reading the manga when I was about 10, and then when I was in high school, I kind of branched out to some of her other works, like Miss Rain and Prism Time and the Cherry Project and Maria. I actually have a Japanese printed version of Maria because the art is just so delicate. It looks like if you touched it, it would break. I always kind of wanted to be a little bit like Naoko, and I don't think I could ever really do that. My line art is too thick. Um, the way I draw hair is too stylized. She stylized it too. It just looks so light, like feathers almost. Um, so I really love her art. I love the long fingers and the long legs, and I think it looks very elegant. A lot of people think they look skinny or sick, and I think they look cool. Of course, not realistic at all, but I think it looks neat. Second on my list is Yoshiyuki Sadamoto. He is, of course, the character designer for Evangelion, Fooly Cooly. He did some work on the Dot Hack series, so his designs and his character aesthetics have been present in my life for a really, really long time. Comparatively, the way he draws eyes is much smaller than, say, Sailor Moon or something like that. So when I went from watching, Sailor Moon to watching Evangelion, I noticed, whoa, these characters are, they're designed completely different. And I really liked that. I really liked that they were designed kind of more angular, smaller eyes, more realistic length hair, like not realistic colors, just like, their hair wasn't going down to their ankles. So I appreciate that about him. Of course, then he did the character designs for Fooly Cooly, which was a couple years after Ava, but the designs once again were kind of more down to earth, even if they did have a different kind of palette. And I really like his design aesthetics are always really good. And then if you ever get the chance to read the Evangelion manga, you can just look at his art all day and all night, and it's always just so crisp and precise and totally different from Naoko, but I really like it. And then moving along is my third artist is Riyoko Ikeda. Um, she wrote the stop scratching the carpet. Hey. She wrote the comic Rose of Versailles in the 70s. That was her most famous work. She also did Onisama A and Claudine and works like that. I prefer her work from more of the mid 70s, Claudine and Orpheus no Mado. That style of work is what I prefer. I think Rose of Versailles was a little earlier in her career before she got her style down, so they kind of have rounder faces. The art is less detailed, but the art in Claudine is outstanding. Just every page is so dramatic. There's like a lot of emotion. Like there's just tons of drama on every page. Like the shading, because a lot of the shading she did was by hand. You can tell it's not screen tone. It's all by hand. And I think that's really impressive. Even though there was screen tone in the 70s, it's not like what we have today. In fact, a lot of the screen tone they have in the 70s I think looks really cool, and I wish I could buy it. And I'm like jealous. I'll read old manga from the 70s and 80s and I'll be like, I want to buy that. Where can I buy that? um, so then moving along, a little different than my manga artists, I have Patrick Nagel. He was a graphic artist in the 80s, and I love him. I have several of his prints in my house. My mom collected his prints, and then so I just kind of grew up around these very pale women with black hair and, you know, big red lips. I love them. I think they're all very beautiful. And I wish Patrick Nagel could have lived a little bit longer, but I don't know if he would have survived outside of the 80s because his work is just so of the era. But I like it. I like the cool color palettes and just the overall look. It's almost a little deco in a way, just with the crisp lines and all of that. Then lastly, um I have Salvador Dali. And I think I almost like him as a person more than his art. And that sounds a little rude, but I have done a ton of research on his life. I read every single book about him that I can get my hands on. I like I feel like I can relate to him as an artist in some ways, and of course not in other ways, because he had a very outlandish, attention-seeking personality, and I'm not really like that. But when he was a little kid, he told his dad, like, his dad was going to get him drawing lessons, and he told his dad, no, 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 I want to be an impressionist painter. Like, duh, dad. And then by the time he was 16, he already had almost completely mastered impressionism and was almost kind of moving into like Fauvist territory with his like kind of more expressionistic brushstrokes. And that was only by the time he was 16. And then he kind of moved on to Cubism. He was a big fan of Pablo Picasso, so he was watching his career closely. He didn't create surrealism. He was just kind of the poster child for surrealism. He discovered it and he loved it. He fell in love with it, and he discovered that's what he wanted to do with the rest of his life. I think it's interesting that he, just is the way he is. I remember there was a time when I was a kid, I remember watching Sailor Moon very vividly, and just in my head, I said, someday I want to draw just like that. Of course, I've kind of moved away from wanting to draw exactly like, the Toei animation style, of Sailor Moon. And I don't even really want to draw like Naoko anymore. I've kind of come into my own, but I remember there's that moment of clarity when I was a kid where I was like, this is what I want to do. And I know how to draw realistically, just like, Dali knows how to, like, he has these fantastic still lifes where it's like photorealistic. I'm not that good, no way, but yeah, I can draw people as they really are. I just prefer to not to. That's not what makes me happy, you know. Drawing manga and anime style is just, what I like. I call it cartoons just because I live out in the West, though. There's still people out here that refer to all anime as Pokemon. You draw that Pokemon? I'm like, no. I just draw cartoons. Don't strain yourself. Just call it what you think it is. So that was pretty much the end of my list. I have a few others I can throw in there for good measure. I really like Amy Brown. I guess it was probably be a bonus, but Amy Brown did like fairy watercolors in the early 2000s, and I'm sure you can find like knockoff versions of her art everywhere. Like it was everywhere. I remember it was like in Hot Topic, in gas stations, just like all these like knockoffs of her watercolors. It kind of sucked, and I don't know if she ever took legal action, but I'm sure if you Google Amy Brown fairies, it'll pull up, tons of images. I'm sure you'll recognize it like right away, like, oh, this. But I have one of her art books. I would like more, actually. I just always liked the way she drew dresses, and her character's really interesting.